Hey guys, hey, this is Chris from Flash Kits. The 9th edition rules have finally dropped, and I'm going to break down the differences between 8th edition and 9th. I've got both sets of rules in front of me, so let's step through it phase by phase and see how Warhammer is going to be different in 9th edition.
Look at me, Flash Boss!
So first things first, there's a new phase to the game, the command phase. The command phase is going to be used for stratagems that affect your army for the rest of the turn, something like prepared positions. And additionally, at the start of your command phase, you're going to regenerate 1 CP. Not too much has changed about the movement phase, except that there's now a thing called remain stationary, which for all intents and purposes is if you didn't select a unit to move or advance or fall back, they're assumed to have remained stationary. This helps out rules-wise because there was some weird verbiage in some rules before where it said if this model didn't move in its previous movement phase. Now they can just shorten that rule to say if this unit remained stationary in its previous movement. One of the other changes in the movement phase is that models are now able to move freely over terrain that's 1 inch or less in height. This is a good change because previously in 8th edition, if you had something that could be considered a barricade, like a short knee-high wall, technically your tank couldn't go through it, even though in reality a tank would just destroy that knee-high wall. In the psychic phase, one of the big changes is that you no longer can jump from psyker to psyker. You can only activate each psyker once per psychic phase, meaning that you've got to get through every single cast that you want to do with that psyker when you activate that psyker. There's going to be no more casting one spell on one psyker with 2 casts and then moving on to another psyker and then going back to that psyker. Aside from that, the psychic phase is more or less the same. The Neither Witch is still the same, 24-inch range. The only other small change is they changed the wording on Super Smites, where instead of saying on a dice roll of greater than 10, it just says 11 plus now. It's a small change, but it's more in line with how the rest of the verbiage is for the game. The shooting phase has quite a few different changes from 8th edition. For starters, monsters and vehicles can now shoot when they're locked in combat. This is a huge change because this means that you can no longer tie up a Lehman Russ from shooting with a single grunt. That tank can now shoot into combat and try to clear it out and make sure that its main gun can shoot at a different target. This is actually a pretty solid change for Death Guard Plague Burst Crawlers with the Plague Spitters, because now you can shoot those 2 flamers into combat. Another huge change is how the character keyword works. It's no longer that if you have a character and there's a hidden unit of Nurglings and Klets closer that no matter what, you can't shoot that character. That's no longer the case. That character now has to be within 3 inches of a friendly unit in order to not be able to be targeted. Another big change in how attacks are resolved is that after your opponent has selected a model to take hits, they've got to keep allocating attacks to that model until that model is dead. Basically what that means is with Deathwatch armies, people would take Deathwatch veteran squads. They'd have a regular guy with a Storm Shield and a Terminator with a 2-up armor save. If you shot at them with a mix of weapons, they would take the AP 0 shots on the 2-up Terminator, and then they'd take any AP shots on the guy with the Storm Shield. You can't do that now. As soon as you pick one model to take shots, that model has to continue taking shots for the rest of the phase until that model is dead. Another big change in the shooting phase is that hit and wound modifiers are now capped at plus or minus 1. Now that doesn't mean that you can't stack hit modifiers or wound modifiers. It just means that they're going to cancel each other out until you hit -1 or +1. For example, if you've had a Nurgle unit with Miasma of Pestilence and Benediction of Darkness and Alpha Legion trait, that gives you -3 to hit. If you had something to give you +1 to hit against that unit, you would still only be capped at -1 to hit instead of the -2 that it would normally be in 8th edition. It significantly impacts things like Eldar Flyers and Nurgle Possessed Bots. Next is the charge phase. There are 2 big changes for the charge phase. First one being that if you declare charges against multiple units, you have to be able to make the charge to each unit to have a successful charge. Now, what this means is if you were charging 2 targets, one 5 inches away and one 9 inches away, you'd have to roll a 9 for that. You'd have to roll a 9 for that charge to be successful. Even if you rolled a 6 in 8th edition, that would have succeeded since you would have hit the unit within 5 inches. But in 9th edition, you've got to hit both units. Probably the biggest change to the charge phase is Overwatch is now a stratagem. It's no longer an automatic action. Unless you're Tau, Now it's a 1 CP stratagem, so effectively you can only pick one unit to overwatch the charge phase. And lastly, if you're charging and your opponent heroically intervenes into you with a character, you can now attack that character even if you didn't declare it as a charge. This makes heroic interventions just a little bit riskier and no longer in automatic action. For the fight phase is more or less the same. The only difference is, if it's your turn, after all chargers have fought, your opponent gets to activate a unit first, then it alternates back to you. Now, I think this is a good change because what this does is prevents one unit from fighting 2 times in a row before the unit it's locked in combat with is able to swing back. For example, if Unit A charges Unit B, Unit A fights, and then Unit B gets the fight, and then it becomes your opponent's turn. On your opponent's turn, your opponent could activate Unit B first before Unit A got a chance to fight again. Effectively, that means that Unit B gets to fight twice without taking a hit back. Another change in the fight phase is the default melee weapon that all units are assumed to have. You can no longer use it if you have an actual melee weapon. So every model is assumed to have a close combat weapon that is strength user, AP 0, damage 1. In 8th edition, you could elect to use that weapon instead of something like your chain sword or your possessed flailing arms. And this was effective for trying to not kill a unit so that you could tri-point it and keep it locked into combat. In the 9th edition fight phase, if you have a melee weapon that you can use that isn't the default close combat weapon, you have to use that weapon. Lastly, we have the morale phase. The morale phase has been significantly changed. Though a leadership test is still the same. It's the number of models you lost plus D6. If that's above your leadership, then you failed. However, in 9th edition, if you fail the leadership test, what that means is one model automatically flees, and then you have to roll a D6 for each remaining model, and on a roll of 1, that model flees. Additionally, if that unit's under half strength, then 1s and 2s result in a model flee. This differs from 8th edition morale in that if, for example, you had lost 4 models, you rolled a 6, 4 plus 6 equals 10, your leadership 2, that means 2 models flee. In 9th edition, with that same test result, 1 model would automatically flee, then assuming that there were 10 models left in the unit, you would roll 10d6. And for each result of 1, another model would flee. This really incentivizes taking minimum size units to make them immune to morale, more so than 8th edition. This also hugely negative impacts horde army. The last part of the morale phase is unit coherency checks. Previously, if you were just pulling models, you could pull models and leave them out of coherency and it wouldn't matter. They just wouldn't be able to move. Now, if a model is out of coherency at the end of the morale phase, they're just gone. This means no longer being able to pull models that break the unit's coherency but still keep something on the objective. So if you found this content helpful, the Flash Gets podcast is live every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern on Twitch TV, Flash Gets 40K. I also stream Thursdays and Sundays, 7 p.m. Eastern, same channel. See you in the next video, and keep up the DACA.